everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Again, is laying on top of me. I have a very important video topic today, and it's a question that I get asked very frequently on my pages, and that is, why is my veterinarian so against feeding raw? I feel like I can't feed my pets raw foods because my veterinarian is so against it. And this is something that is very common in all parts of the world, and a big reason why people completely toss out the idea of feeding raw completely. And this topic is actually also covered on my blog, The Pup and Polecat. If you go over there, it's pretty much like my video script. Great for those of you who prefer to read along with a video or to read something after the video. And it will also include all of the links to the studies that I talk about in this video. Be sure to go check that out. I will have the link to it below. Anyways, let's just jump right into it. Why do veterinarians say no to raw? And I totally understand why many people just sort of push the idea to the side of feeding raw because their vet doesn't want them to. Because, I mean, after all, they're the professionals and not you. So it's really difficult to go against what they say, especially seeing as they went to school for 8, sometimes even more years. And many of them have come to the same conclusion that feeding raw is dangerous for your animals. But as of late, more and more pet parents, such as yourself, have been educating themselves on the topic of fresh feeding and really just kind of diving into the truths behind animal nutrition, and have started questioning their vet's stance on this topic. And a big reason for that is because for humans, for you and I, the popular and science-backed recommendation by doctors is to increase the amount of fresh whole foods consumed and minimize the processed. You're going to see this at pretty much any doctor's office. Do this for optimal health and wellness. Food is medicine, and we seem to have a good grasp on this concept for humans, even for other animals. We see, if you go to the zoos, the wild cats, the big cats, and the wolves, they are being fed a species appropriate, biologically appropriate diet of raw meats and prey. Even the snakes and other types of reptiles that we keep in our homes today are to be fed real meat, real prey, mice, and this is something that veterinarians do recommend for these species. So why is it so different for our domesticated dogs, cats, and ferrets? These animals that I mentioned are all carnivores, some more stricter than others, like cats and ferrets. They are strict carnivores. What makes their needs different than their wild ancestors in the zoos today? Because after all, domestication does not significantly alter the needs of a species, certainly not enough to justify any big changes. I mean, you're going from fresh, real meat from wild animals, wild prey, rabbits, birds, and you're forcing them to eat something that is so different, so ultra processed, that we people don't even have like an adequate comparison because we don't eat like that. We are told not to eat like that. And yes, before I jump right into all of the details of this topic, I am biased, and I am the first to admit this. I am a raw feeder myself. I've been feeding my pets fresh foods for years now, and I have seen the benefits. I have seen the amazing things that it has done for my animals. So my purpose with this article and with this video is to help those who have been swayed against feeding fresh whole foods, feeding raw, to their pets by veterinarian experts. So where does this skepticism originate from? You will notice that most conventional veterinarians around the United States and other parts of the world too are recommending the same like 3 brands of food, and they all seem to have this similar stance that raw is dangerous. So one would assume that they come to these conclusions based on what they're being taught in school and the major governing bodies in place. For example, the American Veterinary Medical Association, the AVMA, has a stance of the AVMA discourages the feeding to cats and dogs of any animal source protein that has not first been subjected to a process to eliminate pathogens because of the risk of illness to cats and dogs as well as humans. So let's take a look at that for a second, the risk of illness, because this stance, this statement, can actually be debunked fairly easily. In an internet survey that concluded foodborne pathogens are seldom transmitted to humans through raw pet food, Only around 0.02% of the data collected suggested that this occurred in the 16,475 households that were examined for the survey. And in the households that did report a transmission, none of them were required to provide any medical proof of any diagnoses or anything like that. I have a quote here that says, "In the remaining 36 households where the raw pet food was not tested for the pathogen, the infection might have been due to something else than the raw pet food." It was concluded again that minimally processed raw diets rarely resulted in reportings of pathogen transmission to human members. Now, we all know that surveys are not a perfect source of information, and your veterinarian will likely not take it very seriously. It will not be enough to convince them. However, we do have much evidence to support raw feeding. And if we remain on the subject of foodborne pathogens and the risks towards human and animal health, let's take a look at the actual data that we have. But do note that the FDA is not regularly testing kibbles for pathogens. Many recalls are due to self-report, meaning it is entirely possible that the true contamination amounts in kibble are much higher than what is reported. In fact, it's probably pretty likely because we don't have mandatory testing on each batch of food prior to shipment. In 2021, there have been 6 pet food recalls that I could find that were due to foodborne pathogens like salmonella. There have been 2 recalls of kibble that contained pathogenic bacteria. One of them has like 10 different types of cat and dog food. But because these brands are owned by one major parent company, it is considered one recall for both. So instead of being like 10 different kibble recalls for each brand of food that were recalled, they just do one recall for the main parent company, so it looks a lot less than it actually is. There have been 3 recalls of raw pet food due to pathogenic bacteria this year so far. One of them was an extension on a current recall of the same brand, so technically 2 brands had this issue this year. There was also a single recall for a cooked pet food. It was a lot that they found had the bacteria, and they marked it for destruction, but it was accidentally shipped out and sold. But in each contamination, both kibble, raw, and cooked food, there were no reports of human or pet illnesses or any complications. So for the reports and data that we have for this year alone, and for prior years as well, one could not suggest that raw pet foods have a higher risk than kibble at transmitting these pathogens to people and animals, not only because we don't have any reports of that even happening this year, but because by weight, much more kibble had to be destroyed. Much more of it was contaminated due to pathogenic bacteria than raw pet food by a very, very large margin. Many more animals and humans were exposed to this bacteria because of the kibble. In fact, one of the most notable instances of human illnesses linked to pathogenic bacteria from pet food was an outbreak due to kibble. In 2012, 49 people all over the United States were infected with salmonella, according to the CDC. And this was from kibble. So it is pretty alarming, pretty confusing that the FDA has issued numerous warnings to pet parents that feeding raw food could pose a big risk in the pathogenic bacteria department, to be careful, that they do not advise it. Yet we're not seeing anything like that for kibble companies. And there have been other recalls this year on kibble for a variety of reasons, including toxic levels of aflatoxin. These are very, very dangerous, and the FDA actually had to put out a warning saying that these foods that had these levels of aflatoxins were responsible for the illnesses or deaths of hundreds of animals. This just recently happened. The levels were 28 times more than the safe upper limit. There have also been numerous kibble recalls in previous years due to toxic levels of nutrients. Many animals got sick and died because of this, and this is food that veterinarians are actively recommending. We'll touch back on that a little bit later. Another important fact here to note is what even happens when you get salmonella, right? It's actually very rarely life-threatening, especially to like an average healthy adult person. And for cats, dogs, and ferrets, very rarely does it pose a problem. You are more likely to contract this from your own human food. For example, recently, more than 650 people got salmonella due to imported onions. Yet, you do not see doctors, because of this situation, instructing people to limit their fresh food, whole food intake and begin consuming more highly processed foods because it's safer. That's just not something that happens for people. And for our domesticated carnivores, it is even harder for them to be affected by this. And this is simply due to the fact that they are carnivores. As the name suggests, their bodies are built to handle raw meat. This is an indisputable fact of nature. That is how your dog, your cat, and your ferret were built to thrive. They wouldn't be made carnivores and then get sick from eating meat. You know, I mean, obviously it has happened. There's never absolutes, but it is very, very rare. Over the years, many studies have been funded, usually by the kibble companies themselves, to prove the long-term efficiency of feeding kibble for carnivores instead. They learned that because kibble had no outward complications, like immediate outward complications, that it was a decent method of feeding that people could get away with doing at a low cost. The big veterinarian-backed food brands actually came out to say that corn and other filler ingredients were not only okay to be fed to carnivores, but they're actually totally healthy for them. And all of a sudden, we began to start blurring the lines of what is a carnivore. All of a sudden, dogs are now omnivores, and what these animals could be forced to tolerate over time. But contrary to popular belief by veterinarians and pet food manufacturers, kibble has come at a great cost and is beginning to finally be challenged by researchers all over the world. I have a couple studies here, and you can get the links in the linked article to this video. The first study that I have compares dogs with atopic dermatitis, so various skin conditions, and when fed both kibble and raw diets, the raw diets promoted immunity and decreased oxidative stress, which is absolutely key in preventing and managing hypersensitivities. We see every year it appears more and more animals are being diagnosed with allergies, and more of them are being prescribed very harsh allergy medications at such young ages. Another study that I have here, I have a quote that says, in case of no consumption of raw food at all, or eating 80% or more of the puppy's diet as dry food, there was a significant increase in the prevalence of allergy and atopy-related skin conditions in the same dogs later in life. So this is showing us that when puppies are not given raw food or not given enough raw food, they're eating more than 80% as dry food of their diet, they are having more issues down the line with allergies and skin conditions. And you may be thinking, well, you know, that's kind of like minor, it's on the outside. Many animals are crippled by their allergies. They're chewing their paws, they're bleeding, they're having trouble digesting, their microbiome is messed up. Another study here I have where they took beagles and they were used to document whether the supplementation of raw bones caused any tooth injury and their overall impact on teeth. Because if you've been to the vet, if you've brought up that you're interested in feeding raw, one of the things that you may hear from them, one of the concerns that they have, is that feeding raw bones may break their dog's teeth, cause complications in the mouth. But we have a study here that shows that supplementation of bones, especially SB, which is spongy bones, was highly effective in removing calculus on their teeth in adult beagle dogs. It also says that continuous consumption of bones for 13 days did not cause any root fracture, enamel fracture, and bone resorption. And I also have a bunch of before and after photos on the article of these dogs that were used for the study, and you can clearly see how amazing the teeth look after eating bones for just a short amount of time. But we're seeing today dental procedures and yearly cleanings are being recommended to all animals, cats, dogs, and ferrets, for them to come in, go under anesthesia, get their teeth cleaned every year. It's seen as like a normal part of their care routine when they really don't need to get that done. And then the last study that I mentioned here is the gut microbiome of captive wild wolves fed kibble diets are significantly different than when fed a fresh meat diet. Some of the findings included a higher amount of certain bacteria, which is common in kibble diets and in humans and mice with irritable bowel syndrome. They have similar bacteria populations in their gut. It says it is possible that bacterial taxa associated with kibble diets are present to aid in the digestion of dietary material, but could also be triggering GI inflammation due to their foreign nature and or production of SCFAs, chronic elevated levels in the captive red wolf. Now, of course, this is a study for wolves, which they're not going to be totally the same as our domesticated dogs, but there are also many studies that have shown that there's a difference in microbiome populations and types of bacteria that can be found in the gut in domestic dogs fed fresh diets versus processed diets, and I have those links in the article as well. It's clearly a very shocking bias that presents itself in modern veterinarians. Why are we still seeing these baseless arguments that feeding raw is dangerous when we have all the evidence that proves otherwise? I found a journal actually that focused more on the dangers of raw feeding, so it's kind of like a typical thing that you would see in a vet office, and it actually sums this up perfectly. At the end of the journal, it states, with respect to the potential adverse effects of raw feeding, evidence of risk is mostly piecemeal in nature and commonly fails to demonstrate tangible consequences of the identified hazard. It is very, very difficult to actually support the thing that veterinarians are saying about how raw food is going to make you, your kids, your dogs, because we simply don't have the data and the evidence to support that. We have no reports of that this year and in previous years too. If anything, we have more reports and more evidence of kibble having more of a risk at spreading pathogenic bacteria to our families. Another sort of interesting thing that happens is how for humans we don't really seek out our doctors for nutritional advice, certainly not specific nutritional recommendations. I mean, they give us the guidelines, but really what we normally do, the mail truck is outside, so if you hear that, what we normally do is we go see a nutritionist. But for pets, we usually get everything we need to know about our pet from one person, the veterinarian, despite the fact that only a very, very small amount of them actually go on to receive their nutrition certifications. According to the American College of Veterinary Nutrition, it appears there are less than 100 board-certified nutritionists in the United States. There are, however, many certified animal nutritionists who are not veterinarians, such as myself. But seeking out those individuals who are not veterinarians it's actually discouraged by veterinarians, despite the fact that they have received much more specific education on the subject of animal nutrition, and many are actually provided by accredited universities. My certification in animal nutrition was from an accredited university, a real university. I'm not saying there aren't like scam certifications out there because it is fairly unregulated, but you do need to be careful who you're getting your advice from. According to veterinarian Dr. Annie Rourke, all graduates of U.S. veterinary schools, no matter where they graduated, had nutrition integrated into their curriculum, whether it was a required course labeled Nutrition 407 or whether it was sprinkled into other aspects of medicine. It's in there. But many people, such as myself, wonder if this can be considered enough to be giving out nutritional recommendations, and very specific ones for specific health conditions as well, and for them to discourage feeding fresh whole foods. Because if you've seen pet nutrition courses and what you are taught, like mine, for example, wasn't focused on raw feeding, and the professors seemed to recommend and have us learn more about feeding home prepared diets, because if you're a nutritionist, that's kind of what you end up gravitating towards. Once you learn the facts, the evidence, the data, you're gonna naturally move away from the ultra-processed kibble and become more interested in making food at home. That is why so many animal nutritionists like raw feeding and recommend it to all of their clients. If you've been to a veterinary office, you likely have seen one of these three brands: Hills Science Diet, Royal Canin, and Purina. These are very, very popular amongst veterinarians, and there appears to be some like polarizing opinions on whether or not vets get paid a lot of money by these companies to sell their foods through their practices. We do know that Colgate, for example, you know, your toothpaste brand, they're actually a parent company that owns the very popular pet food that is recommended by veterinarians. They do actively fund university research and nutrition courses at every U.S. veterinary college. Veterinarian Dr. Tom Lonsdale claims that once in practice, vets who sell Science Diet and other premium foods, i.e. lists a bunch of different foods, directly pocket profits as much as 40% and make much more treating cats and dogs who may eventually get sick eating these foods. But many veterinarians claim this to be misleading. Island Animal Hospital, this is just like a random vet office that I found on Google. says that the reality is that pet food sales in general is one of the least profitable things that we do. They also go on to warn pet parents, but by all means, get your medical advice from the equivalent of your dog's hairdresser or the cashier at the grocery store, and nobody looks out more for your pet's best interest with the knowledge and experience to back it up than your veterinarian. And I find those opinions to be pretty popular amongst conventional veterinarians. A lot of them, obviously, you know, they go through the schooling. They don't want to feel like their knowledge is less than that of someone's groomer or the cashier at the pet store. But a lot of this information is provided for free online for parents to educate themselves. You don't need to be an expert by any means to feed your animals a diet at home. But all of that being said, there are many veterinarians all over the world that actually prefer and promote and recommend raw food to their clients. A lot of these veterinarians are called holistic or integrative veterinarians, but there are also regular, conventional, traditional veterinarians that, while they may promote, you know, dry diets to most of their client base, they are totally fine if they have clients that want to feed a raw diet, as long as the people appear to know what they're doing. And while many professionals have seen the detriments of feeding an unbalanced raw diet, many of them also understand that not everyone is like that, but then many of them don't. So many of them kind of put like a blanket over everyone and assume that everyone is going to do it wrong, and that's why they don't recommend it. I don't agree with that. We need more credit given to ourselves. Like, obviously, as I said, there are many people who have and will do it wrong, but I don't think the answer to this is to discourage raw feeding for everybody and not give the appropriate resources for people who still have the desire to do it right. They may just go off and then, oh, my vet doesn't want me to do this, but I'm going to try to do it anyway. They may end up doing it wrong because they weren't given the appropriate resources. I think it's very important to be respectful of people's choices on what they feed their animals, and if someone comes into your office wanting to feed raw, it is a really good idea to. I mean, you can explain your thoughts, your opinions, make sure you back up what you're saying appropriately, but still give them the resources that they need if they do want to pursue this diet for their animals. And before I go, I wanted to touch on the popular concerns of nutritional deficiencies and or excesses while feeding a homemade raw diet, because I do agree raw diets, homemade diets that you make at home, do have a higher risk of having issues with nutrient balances than Kibble does. Kibble does follow a set of standards to ensure that a basic balance is being met. However, there have been many cases, especially as of late, with Hill's Science Diet, a very big vet-backed brand, were recalled due to toxic levels of nutrients. It was vitamin D, and hundreds of dogs sadly passed away because of this critical mistake that was made by pet food manufacturers. So while the risk is a lot lower in nutritionally complete bags of food, of Kibble, it is by no means free of this, as we have especially seen in recent years and many animals that have passed away because of it. I am of the stance that you absolutely do not need to be an expert to formulate food at home for your animals. All it requires is some careful planning, careful research, and understanding your animal, feeding the animal in front of you. And fortunately, many have already done this work for you. There are many books, articles, PDFs, videos, many resources for you to utilize for free, and if you want to pay some money as well. There are also many credible animal nutritionists out there who can help you create a meal plan to follow for your pet's specific needs. And I'm going to circle back to my little rant earlier about how instead of shaming people, because yes, some have shamed others or have blamed others completely for feeding raw to be the cause of a pet getting sick or the cause of death. Like, I have heard and seen it all firsthand. I know how just awful it can feel to feel like you went out of your way to make this amazing, nutritious, healthy diet plan for your animal, and then you go to the vet and it's like just totally crapped on. I want to reiterate that I have great admiration and respect for veterinarians. They have a very important role in society. I didn't even dive into the foods themselves that they're recommending and the ingredients in these veterinary bags of food. Maybe that can be a topic for another video. I'm running out of memory on my card. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two. This is a very important topic, and I hope it helped those who've been swayed in the past or shamed in the past because of what they've chosen to feed their animals. Thank you to all of our channel members on the channel. Thank you to all of you who have just left comments and likes on all of my videos, who've been subscribed for a long time. I see you, I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.